Hi guys, hope everyone's well and welcome back to the education section. So this video is going to be touching on maximising chest development. Pretty much telling you how can you get the most out of your chest training when it comes to what exercises to pick, how to execute those exercises, and how to potentially structure your sessions and your week of training as a whole. As well as that, I'll go over common mistakes that I see. But first of all, we need to understand what the chest basically does before jumping into how do we maybe train the chest effectively, because without knowing the first, we can't really understand the latter effectively. So when it comes to chest training, what is the role of the pec? The pec is basically what your chest is. It's the proper term for it, your pectoralis. And basically with your chest, it's got an origin and insertion. So basically it starts at the middle of the rib cage. So you'll see in the diagram at the top right, this is where basically your pec goes from and to. So it starts in the middle of the rib cage, and I'll get to why this is important in a second. It's got three different divisions, you could call it, which is the clavicular, sternal and costal fibres. The clavicular, as the name suggests, is near your clavicle, which is basically your collarbone, whereas your sternal attaches to your sternum, which is like the middle fibres of the chest, and then you've got the costal fibres, which is the lower fibres in your chest. And all of these parts basically insert into the upper arm, which is basically a part of your humerus, which is a proper term for your upper arm. But you don't really need to know the fancy name for it. What you just basically have to understand is it attaches to the upper arm. And basically the main role of it is to pull the upper arm into the midline of the body. In other words, adduct the upper arm. So if you think about when you're doing a chest fly, a chest press, you go from here to here. So that's basically the role of the chest, to bring that upper arm across your torso. Think about like a chest fly, for example. It doesn't matter what's happening at the lower arm. It doesn't matter what that really does, because that's not the chest's role. So yeah, the main role is to basically pull the upper arm in the midline of the body, or in other words, adduct the upper arm. And also internal rotation, so internally rotating your arm from here to here, if that makes sense. And the reason we want to understand this is we know, right, when we're training the chest, that should be our focus, doing that through a full range of motion. And where we typically finish a movement will dictate what part of the chest will be biased or which part will be trained. The reason I say bias is we'll never isolate it. What I mean by this is, quite simply put, if we're wanting to target our upper pec, our arm should finish a bit higher, whereas like an incline press or a high incline. Whereas if we're training our mid pec, then it should be kind of not travelling up or down excessively. Whereas if we're training our lower pec, that's more of like maybe a dip variation or a decline press, for example, or maybe even a flat press to an extent. That will work more of your lower pec. But like I said, you'll never isolate one part of your chest. You'll only bias one part more than the other. So what does this basically mean in practice? Like I said, we want to take our upper arm from abducted, meaning right down here in the stretch position, to across our body to fully train our chest. And that just means we're training it for a full range, which will typically be best for muscle growth 99.9% of the time. Obviously, if you've got injuries or anything like that, then that's going to influence things. So in terms of exercise selection, so what we ideally want to do is press from a variation of angles ideally. So flat pressing, incline pressing, maybe a decline or a dip variation, high inclines as well. And this just ensures we're not putting all our eggs in one basket. We're going to be stimulating all of the fibres of the chest effectively and kind of equally, whereas if we do only, let's say, flat pressing, we might miss out on some upper chest development, for example. So it ensures we basically hit the whole pec. And it also prevents redundancy in training. What I mean by this is, if you've already done a flat press, moving on to another flat press, you're probably going to be fatigued and tired doing that movement pattern, whereas you might be fresh doing an incline or a decline press or a dip or a high incline. So it means you're not wasting your time during training. You're not going through like redundancy, which is obviously something valuable. And as well as that, it means like overall loading will be higher in a session. For example, if you've done one session with just flat pressing, then the other session with just incline pressing, you could lift more throughout the whole week, in my opinion, if you've done a flat and an incline in both sessions instead, because you're not going to be fatigued pressing in that movement, pressing in that direction, if that makes sense. And When it comes to training the pec, movements that converge can be valuable for a larger range of motion. So what I mean by converge is when our upper arm basically travels across our body, that will basically allow us to shorten the pec further. And movements that converge is when, see if we're, let's say, doing a barbell press, that's a non-converging movement because our hand stays in the same position from start to finish. When you're at the bottom of a barbell press, you can't bring your arm across your body because it's fixed onto the bar, unless you physically move your hand at the top of the movement, but that's not really going to happen, is it? So movements where we're doing like a Smith machine, a chest press machine where the handle doesn't come in at all, or like a barbell bench press, they're movements that don't converge. Whereas a chest press where the handles come closer together at the top, a dumbbell press, a cable press, they're converging movements. What that basically allows us to do is, like I said, take our upper arm across our body, which basically shortens our chest further, taking it for a larger range of motion, which basically tells us when it comes to exercise selection, movements that converge can be valuable. And we've probably, not that movements that don't converge are useless, but we should probably have at least some movements that converge in our program. And also another benefit and consideration when it comes to machines and Smith, if that's a Smith machine or like a chest press machine or whatever, depending on or regardless of the incline, like what can be valuable is that the stability it provides, because when we're doing a barbell bench press or a dumbbell or a cable press, like we wobble slightly, we're not in the most stable environment, and when we're more stable we can produce more force, we can take that muscle to failure more effectively. So that can be a consideration as well. So as you see, there's no black and white things I'm talking about here. I'll obviously summarise at the end, but we don't want to just put our eggs in one basket, if that makes sense. We want a variation when it comes to movements. And a fly can also be a good option if you're trying to develop your chest. And the reason being is when we're doing a fly, there's less loading due to it being an isolation movement and not a press, which means we're not going to get as much fatigue from the movement. We also, if done correctly, will probably have less involvement from the shoulders and also the triceps, which means if, let's say, your shoulders and triceps dominate the movement, or you've got, let's say, shoulder pain or a pain in your tricep or your elbow joint, a fly could be a good option to kind of accumulate more volume without running into future issues or issues in regards to your just overall joint health. If maybe doing too much pressing is beating them up, because obviously you might want to, if it's a weakness, as well as addressing everything when it comes to exercise selection and execution, you might want to add more overall work towards that movement or towards that body part, and in doing so you might come across pains, etc. So yeah, it can definitely be valuable to add in some flies in there. So basically a take home point is make sure you're pressing from different angles and movements that ideally converge in some cases. And the reason why is like I said, each movement has pros and cons. Some movements don't have as best stability than others. Some movements don't converge when some do. So as you see, there's really one perfect movement, but on paper, a movement that's very stable and allows us to take our chest through a full range of motion is a chest press, where the handles come together slightly at the top. That on paper is going to be a great movement for the reasons stated. And when it comes to execution on pressing movements, what we want to do is basically keep our chest ahead of our shoulders. Basically, it gives our chest leverage. It makes our chest be in a better position to work. Because if you think about, as we went over, like the role of the chest, it attaches onto the upper arm, right? So if, let's say, we're pressing and our upper arm is right in line with our torso, then where does it want to pull the upper arm? This direction. So that means if we're doing a press and we're pressing it up, pressing the machine up, the upper arm's not really going to be in a good position to kind of have a lot of leverage. Whereas if, let's say, I bring my shoulder back, then if you think about the pec attaches from here to here, then I'm going to be in a really efficient position for my upper arm to be pulled this direction. Which basically means, to summarise, it's going to put you in a position where your chest is more likely to do the work.